Thank you for joining us on this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel Olawale. I have with me today a friend, a wonderful woman, a leader, Judge Terri Jamison. I've known her since forever and a day, since law school, and she's been consistently consistent. She is currently the judge-elect of the 10th Appellate Court of Appeals in Ohio, and she's been a judge of the domestic court for over 6 years,
Eight, eight
8
years.
years, and she's going to be going on the appellate bench in January.
No,
Thank
actually,
you.
my term starts in July.
In July, wow. Okay.
hmm So I got a little
Well,
time to get
yes.
that done.
Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Emmanuel, for having me on. It's great honor to be here with you, my my friend and an author and
Thank you.
a great attorney in his own right. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be on with you today.
Thank you. And congratulations on the election results. You know, you won your race and you've never lost one. And I hope you never get to know how it feels to lose one.
Yeah, I won. This one was a little different race, running against an opponent that had been an incumbent for more than 28 years total, made it a little more challenging. So our margin was not as high as it's been in the past, but we had a very respectable win, a 6-point win.
Oh wow, that's huge. Thank you. In the elections, on November 3rd, Franklin County put something on the ballot that has to do with a civilian review board, to reform the police. This stems from the upheavals we've seen over the summer, from the death
Mhm.
of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the protest. The mayor took it seriously, and one of the suggestions was to create a civilian review board. So instead of acting arbitrarily, they decided to put that on the ballot. And an overwhelming number of people in Franklin County and the Columbus area voted to approve this civilian review board. So my question to you is that what are your thoughts in relation to that civilian review board and the process that it took for it to be approved?
Well, and I think that's a great question. And I think it was a great question. And I think it was something that the voters had the right to weigh in on. It's been something that's been discussed down through the years, the need for a civilian review board. And for those of you that don't know what that is, its primary power and responsibility is to review disciplinary cases when an officer is either involved in a shooting or suspended or on administrative leave for some disciplinary act. I think one of the things that was greatly in controversy is whether or not the Civilian Review Board would have subpoena power to be able to bring witnesses in and talk to them. And I think that this model came from several other large cities across the country that already had civilian review boards in place. So subpoena power to bring witnesses in, subpoena power to, have those discussions. And I know that the FOP contract is up at this time and that they are negotiating that contract. So it's in the charter of the city of Columbus, which means that it's in the law. So it's going to be interesting to me to see whether or not it will require police officers to participate in the investigations, because part of their protection, as you know, under the union is to have a union steward or to have an attorney. And if they have pending criminal charges, it would stand to reason that they also have the right to remain silent. So it's going to be interesting to see once they develop it, whether or not the officers have the opportunity to maintain their right to remain silent, or if this is an administrative type of an action that will not be used against them in court. So I think from the perspective of the employees, the officers, they have grave concerns and about their constitutional right to remain silent being abridged by their requirement to participate with the Civilian Review Board.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think I understand that and I share the same sentiment because I don't think their constitutional right should be violated, in exchange for the Civilian Review Board. But at the same time, I still believe that the board can still have their kind of investigation to figure out what happened without actually having to subpoena the police officer, but they can get other witnesses that witness whatever situation they're investigating. Because the same thing goes into like a criminal case. Sometimes the prosecutor doesn't have to talk to the defendant, but they can put pieces together from either circumstantial evidence, from witnesses, or reconstruct whatever happened. So my next question is this: who do you think should make up the board?
I think from an independent standpoint, and I don't know what these citizens themselves would like. I wonder if it should be done in an election process, or is it going to be made up of retired law enforcement, other citizens? I think there needs to be some education around the training that officers receive, what's necessary to be an officer, and the policies and the procedures actually of the officers. That's going to be really critical. Someone that has that kind of a knowledge base. I don't know that I believe they should be appointed. I believe that the citizens should get to choose some of the at-large members or someone that makes up part of this board. And I think therein lies some of the difficulty about, even if it were an electoral process, who would decide who the candidates are, what would be the requirements to be a candidate. There has to be some requirement around it. So the Citizens Review Board should definitely be made up of citizens, whether it's people from the different wards or community organizations. Not sure how they're going to do that. That I'm not familiar with. But I think it should be definitely independent.
Yeah, they should be independent, and I think they should come from the different communities that these police officers serve. Because let's use the jury process for an example. When you have a jury pool, they come from all walks of life, and they're supposedly the jury of your peers from your environment. You can have a case in Franklin County, and they wouldn't summon a jury from Lincoln County.
That's
So I
exactly.
believe, yeah, I believe the board should come from the community, from the community in
We
which
have
they
many
serve.
area commissions around town.
Yeah.
So it would not be hard for them to find representatives. I think though, if you put it on as an electoral process or coming from these commissions, what requirements would you have for them to be able to be in an electoral position, even if you're coming from those community organizations or the particular communities around the city? It's imperative that you have people that are independent, unbiased, and trained in some manner about what police officers' functions are, what they should do, how things, their policies and procedures, and they'd have to have some knowledge, some working knowledge of the contracts that the officers have so that they know whether or not they're infringing upon their contract. They would have to have some legal knowledge to know whether or not they're infringing upon their constitutional rights, because they have the right to be protected as well. And they still stand in the same place as any other person that's thought to have done something wrong. You're still innocent until it's proven that you've done something wrong. So I think we have to make sure that they are treated fairly. I think you need to hold monthly public meetings that provide an opportunity for members of the public to present questions and comments to the board. I think there has to be some accountability, you know, in resolving these matters. They should be investigated. Reports should be done by a certain time. I don't think it should last months and months and months because someone wants to keep an investigation going beyond a certain time. I think it has to have some time constraints on it. And I just think that it's something that's needed, but I don't want it to be so that it infringes upon the rights of any person.
Yeah. Yeah. And why do you think it took so long for Columbus to have something like this? Because compared to other large cities, it took a while for us to get here. What do you think was responsible for that?
Well, I remember when Columbus entered into a consent agreement with the federal government. I don't think this was part of the consent agreement. I think if this had been part of that agreement, that they could have gotten it earlier. I think getting it on the ballot was critical and key so that the citizens had an opportunity to decide whether or not they felt it was necessary. I remember the consent agreement that was several years ago. They complied, and the consent agreement was handled. But I think that the citizenry was never really satisfied with the outcome. And I think because we are a government of the people, that the people's input should always be considered. And anytime something goes to the ballot, and if it's affirmed or denied, I think that the wisdom of the people speak. And I think it's really critical that we keep that open dialogue, that things that come up go before the voters. Issue 1 with the drug reform went before the voters. It didn't pass, but it was still before the voters. And this was another issue that went before the voters. We've had several things, that went before the voters. Some passed, some didn't. But in this case, I think that the public was feeling like they really wanted more open investigation, in particular to the police involved shootings and fatalities. And I think the feeling that it couldn't get either a special prosecutor, we know that has been refused. There was no citizen investigation that had been refused. It left the community with the feeling that it was not fair, it was not impartial, and that there was always some hidden agenda. So anytime you have your citizenry believing that they're being shut out, that there is no open investigation, there's no outside parties looking at it, they have the feeling that the reason you don't want someone to come in and see is because you're hiding something. So anytime your citizens feel that things are being hidden from them, whether they are or not, it leaves that distrust.
Definitely. And when it comes to either selecting or appointing or electing the people that will comprise of the board, I think if it's going to be an elective position, then we're going to have a danger of politicizing the membership in the board, which will lead to
Mm,
fundraising and all that. And when you have to raise
well, that's
funds
true.
from the community, you're going to get, because whoever pays the piper dictates the tune. So you might
Mm,
have contributions coming from dark money, then the board itself
that's
will
true.
become another body that will be ineffective, bought by some members of the public. So, well, this is just my opinion, and I hope the people, who are going to make the decisions are listening. I think they shouldn't be subject to campaigning for office. They should be maybe rotate them on maybe 2 or 3 year, but they should be appointed by the mayor from different members of the community and part of the people who are also protesting, so that the Black Lives Movement, the Black Lives Matter, and all other activists. So that way they actually feel like they have a voice. Though my next question is, because
The
this is
appointment process. Okay, so with the appointment process, there's still room for politicizing. So it's either way. It's there's room for politicizing. Maybe city council.
Mhm.
Maybe you have to go through the same screening process as the law enforcement officers go through to make sure, because I know they go through an extensive background check. They also go through a psychological assessment. I mean, I don't know if those are things that you want to include in your board, because these are people that are going to have access to a lot of documents, access to witnesses, access to information. So those are things that I think about. If I were a witness to this, do I want someone having my information that's maybe not as mentally fit as they should be? How do we determine those things, and who's going to make up this board? When you talk about political appointments, whether it's the mayor or the governor or some form, I think it has to be a bipartisanship, because that means the board would change every time you got a different mayor in or a different party change. So I think, though, are you looking for consistency, or are you in the service of the people on the board?
Yes, there should be that consistency. And the next kind of controversy that I've been noticing is whether or not current police officers or retired officers should be a member of the board. What do you think?
If you have current police officers, it's not a citizens review board.
Exactly. How about retired officers?
um, uh, that's a little different question. I think it depends on the makeup. And I think then, too, you have to go back and look at the officer's past service record. Did they have issues with abuse of power, or abuse of force, or those type of things? Or was it someone that's been a training officer that actually has a good record? Um, that still would taint the board somewhat, because it would not be a citizens review board. And I think anytime you bring people in, I think bias is going to come in, whether you're a an officer that's been on the force, or you're a citizen that maybe had knowledge, or someone in your family or someone in your community that you felt was done unfairly. I think that this is going to be one of the most critical, and also one of the most difficult jobs, is getting people on the board that have no bias and are
Thank you.
actually able to look at it from an objective perspective. That's going to be critical, and that's going to be difficult, because people have such a low opinion of law enforcement in some areas. And then you have the other extreme. You have people that believe the officer is always right. So I think it's going to be a difficult decision and a difficult. It's going to be some difficulty because what we're trying to get is clarity. You're trying to get transparency. You want all of these things to be present. And if you have retired officers or officers on the board, you're going to feel that there's a lack of transparency that can lead to disgruntled members of the board. It can lead to division on the board. And really, there's no way that you're not going to have some difficulty because you're going to have people that believe that everything was done properly, and then you're going to have people that disagree with the decision of the board. So it's going to be critical, and it's going to be a difficult transition, but it's a necessary transition to give accountability, to give transparency, to make decisions on discipline. And it's really going to be critical that they have some type of monthly public meeting. They're going to have to provide the members of the community the right to ask questions, to make comments on decisions. It's going to be an ongoing training where you're trying different things, but then adjusting to what doesn't work. It's something they've never done. They've done it in other big cities, but even then, in those cities, they have referendums that periodically go on the ballot to make adjustments to what's already been done.
Thank you. I think, yeah, we need that transparency, and we also need like I said, the board needs to be trained in police procedures, contracts, and all that. When it comes to retired police officers, my take is that they don't need to be a member of the board, because if they're a member of the board, there's that bias. However, in a situation where the board needs maybe an expert opinion, they can always get an ex-officer to come and testify as a witness, or to get their ideas, or to get their opinions in moving forward or in doing the investigation without actually having them as members of the board. What kind of powers do you think the review board should have? Should they just have, we have discipline, we have investigative, we have subpoena power, we have the recommendation for criminal prosecution, and what kind of powers do you think they ought to have?
Well, disciplinary matters, you still got a union contract. You still have to follow their contract. And discipline is within the discretion or within the four corners of the contract. And as you know, when you're dealing with a contract, that's where the discipline is found. However, I think the board could make recommendations toward discipline, but the discipline would have to fit whatever the indiscretion was. You can't come in and fire someone for something that the contract says maybe you get 1 day off without pay. So I think a lot of it's the challenge is having the civilian review board, and I think they should review the actual investigation. They can make comments, they can make recommendations, but there's also going to be an investigation done by the department as well, because they have a department, internal affairs, that also does investigations. So you could end up with two different recommendations for discipline. And I think the contract is going to govern which recommendation actually gets carried out. So it's not sure how the contract, since it's in the place of being negotiated right now, will be affected by this. Will it be part of the contract? So I'm sitting on the outside looking in like the rest of the community, waiting to see if they're going to put this inside the contract.
Contract. Yeah.
You know, and
At
it's
least,
and when you look around in other cities, like I said, they've had civilian review boards, but they've also had different times they've gone back to the ballot with different referendums trying to expand the power of the review board or to reduce the power of the review board. But when you're the board wants to require the officers to participate in investigations. They want to be part of conducting performance audits of the police um, and then determining how long someone gets to sit on the board. So there's times where they found that what they had didn't work. So they had to go back to the voters. With this being brand new, they might have to come back to the voters. It may need to be tweaked. In time, things change just like the law does. So it could have to go back on the ballot.
Yeah. So, how can the board function in conjunction with internal affairs investigation within the division?
I don't
Especially
think it
since,
will
do you
function.
think that, yeah, do you think that you have like contemporaneous investigation going on, or the board should wait until internal affairs completes their own investigation, then review it? How do you
Well,
think they should
Emmanuel,
function?
as you know, as being a lawyer, if you don't get evidence quickly, it can witnesses can be hard to find. Those
Disappear.
things. So it does appear that both of them could possibly be working and investigating at the same time um, in order to get to the information at the same time. Because, with witnesses being hesitant to testify already, they may be more willing to talk to someone from the Citizen Review Board than they are to talk to the police. Then they may not want to talk at all. But with the amount of the number of murders that we've had this year, that is above any other year that we've had in Columbus, we have to look at making sure that things are taken care of quickly and getting to witnesses quickly, being able to get that information. And, when you have public distrust, they're not willing to talk to the officers, but they might be willing to talk to a member of the review board. So it could be ongoing at the same time. I think a lot of these things still may be undecided. The reason they had a task force that's working on this now. But I do believe that you're going to need to do both simultaneously to be able to get the same information, to get your crime scene views. I know that legislation has said that BCI will do all investigations. So that's taking it outside of the city already. But, there's going to be ongoing things. As you know, when you put together a felony packet, it takes time. It takes time to get the witness. It takes time to get your toxicology reports. It takes time to get your gunshot residue test. It takes time to get all those things. So it would probably be going on simultaneously from the standpoint of time.
Correct. And I got some comments here that has to do with the contract. Someone said, that being said, the contract needs to make sense. The review board can also have voice at the table when these contracts are being negotiated. The board should be able to make recommendations they can give to the FOP and the city to ensure that the contract protects the officers and the citizens. Then someone said the contract itself with the FOP is what we should look at to shape more accountability. What do you think? that's the voice
I
of the
cannot
citizens.
get my legal
Those are the civilians commenting on our discussion.
I cannot give a legal opinion.
I understand.
And
Okay, let's
I'm
move
really,
on. I'm not going
really,
to put you on the spot. Let's move
yeah,
on.
I can't give a legal opinion. Those are good comments.
Yes,
And it's something that I can't legally give an opinion on, especially now since I'm on the 10th District Court of Appeals.
exactly.
And if some of these things were to be appealed, I could be part of that panel. But
Yes.
those are good concepts, and we do know that the contract is being negotiated now. So those,
Okay.
as I said, looking at some of the other review boards that I saw around the country, there have been times they've had to go back and make adjustments. But I think at this point, we haven't even got it structured yet and off the ground. So to try to circumvent difficulties uh, is difficult. You can look at what the other cities have done and try to make sure that you miss some of those things, but each city still has its own sets of facts and circumstances. I think this is great that it was passed. I think it is great that they have subpoena power. Um, I think it is a good thing for the community, and it's a good thing for the officers. And I think that it's going to be incumbent upon the officers to make sure that they have their body cams are recording. It gives them another layer of protection as well as the citizens. I think anytime you have transparency, you will increase the trust and the trust factor of the community, and as well as the other officers, because we know that officers have difficulties, or just like any other employee on the job. So race is a huge factor right now in our community. Having grown up the first time with the civil rights movement, I see a second civil rights movement now. And this Citizens Review Board assists us because anytime there's transparency, it's better for the community.
Yeah. And you're so correct. Race is very integral in this conversation. I just recently finished reading the book of the retired Lieutenant Melissa McFadden. I don't know if you know about a memoir. She
I
detailed,
know I
yes,
interviewed her about
exactly.
her memoir.
Exactly. She detailed what she went through in the Columbus Police Division as a Black officer and the inherent internal racism within the police department, how there is disparate treatment in meting out discipline to Black officers as compared to white officers. Should the Civilian Review Board also investigate internal discrimination within the police division? Do you think they should have that power?
I think that steps beyond um, the intent of it, because you have other things for that. You got the Civil Rights Commission, you've got lawsuits for that. Um, and I think maybe in having input at the beginning on training issues, how training is done. I think even in our field, in the legal field, I was glad when they started having cultural diversity training. And I think we need more. Um, we need more. you know, um, it doesn't matter what field you're in, race has an integral part in how you're treated. Um, I can speak to that myself. Having grown up, started in segregation, I went through desegregation of schools. I've always worked in male dominated professions, and still, race was a part of it as well as sexism. So, with Melissa's book and many other memoirs of different African Americans that have written, you will see sometimes it's not always just race. Sometimes it's your sex and your race. Sometimes it is just race. And one of the best books that I read was called The Good Black. And it was written by a Harvard graduate who went to the Navy. He went to Harvard, always had the best character, the best credentials, but he was still treated differently solely because his race. And he thought that he would be treated differently because he was a good Black and not a Black man that was involved in crime and those kind of things. So we have these opinions that we're going to be treated differently because we're a good Black over someone that's been involved in crime, someone's involved in different things. And it's not always true. You can be a good person that's following all of the societal norms, and you'll find that it doesn't always matter how you're treated. You still could be treated differently. So The Good Black is a true story of race in America. And, I think a lot of times we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be a good Black, and we're still not treated the same because race is such an integral part to how society values people. The value, even in our profession, when you look at the value of a Black person's civil suit over a white person's civil suit, you look at the difference in the damages award. And I know you know that because you're a civil attorney. So we look at how race even plays a part in who shows up for jury duty, who's qualified for jury duty. I talk to Black people all the time to say, if you're not registered to vote, you can't be on a jury. That's where the jury pool comes from. So whether or not you're exercising your right to vote, you still can't be part of a jury. So when we come in and you have a civil case where someone's been injured on their job and they've suffered an injury that ends their career, and the jurors have to place a value on the amount of of damages to be given. And if you're a Black person, your damages are likely to be lower than if you're a white male. And when we look at the disparity still in wages, where Black women's equal pay day was back in August, but Latina women's equal pay day was in October. So Black women are making 74 cents to $1 for the average white man, but Latina women are making 55 cents to $1 to the average white man. So still, race has such an integral part, but then there's sex as well. So you have both of those things that we're looking at. And when you're talking about the Civilian Review Board, is it going to be equally made up of women and men? Is it going to be Latina and Latino members? Are there going to be all African American members? Are there going to be any Caucasian members? How are you? What about the Somali population? It's a huge population in this, and the Bhutanese population, and the Nigerian population. Because we're a melting pot, what is that Civilian Review Board going to be comprised of? We've had several Somali victims citizens that have engaged with law enforcement as well and not had a good outcome. So when you look at who's going to make up that board, it shouldn't just be African American Black. It should be all types of minorities on that board. And where are they going to come from?
Exactly. It has to reflect the community. I actually got an email in regards to this from one community member, and this is what he has to say. It says the board shall also be chosen by a diverse community leaders, meaning they should have someone representing new Americans as well. The search should be done by a focus group, which includes leaders from the communities they want to pick from. Just my 2 cents. That's really where the intent for honest results will show. So, a
I
lot
think
of
all
people,
Americans have to be included.
yeah, so a lot of people out there are in line with what you just said. So now let's move on to the issue of qualified immunity for police officers. What are your thoughts on, for people who don't know what qualified immunity means? It means that this is the kind of immunity that officers enjoy while they're on the job. So if they commit some kind of law enforcement malpractice, you won't be able to sue them personally. What do you think of that qualified immunity?
Now, qualified immunity can be pierced, as you know, which means that as long as I'm acting within the policies and procedures of my job, I cannot be sued. That's different than someone that has gone outside of the requirements of the job. Once you go outside the requirements of your job, you can be sued. So, qualified immunity, um, again, that's something that very likely to come up in court. So, what I can say about it is pretty limited, other than to define it as you're protected from legal suits while you're in the performance of your job, as long as you're within the scope of your job description. If you go outside the scope of your job description, then you can be personally sued.
Thank you. How about the idea of additional training for law officers? Because as it is, uh, to become an officer, you only need to go to the academy for about 6 months, and
Mhm.
the minimum requirement is to have a GED or high school. And then you look at us lawyers, you have to have an undergraduate degree, which is 4 years. Then you go to law school for 3 years. That's 7 years before you can even practice law. Then you take the almighty bar exams. Then every year you still have to take CLEs. And yet we don't have a badge and a gun. 6 months training with someone who has just a high school diploma and with little or no life experience and the ability to shoot and kill and with a badge, uh, don't you think maybe there should be more trainings or more continuous education so that they
They
know the
do have
law, they know,
continuing education.
yes, at
They
least
do have
more
to
of
go.
it.
They have to go to training every year.
Okay.
They have to qualify to carry their weapon every year. So there are other qualifications that they have to go through. But one thing that we talked about when I first was elected as a judge was secondhand trauma. We went to judicial training, and a psychologist talked to us and said, in this job, you will experience secondhand trauma. You will see traumas that others go through, and it will begin to impact you. Do I believe that officers possibly have secondhand trauma? I do. So I don't know it's the training that's missing, but it's like any other job. You definitely need vacations. You need mental health. Whatever you do for your own mental health, you need to do that. But I think when you are continuously seeing murders, continuously seeing drug overdoses, continuously seeing children that are abused. You're taking children out of homes. You're seeing child victims. Child victims are harder uh, on you mentally, I think, than a lot of other things. And we've had several child victims, either from stray bullets, accidental shootings this year. Think about the officer that went to that scene and saw what they saw. I think trauma, secondhand trauma, plays a huge part in how we process trauma. There's data that suggests that trauma affects brain development. It affects how you perceive it. It affects you. So even with the training that they have to do, I think that periodically there needs to be some form of trauma counseling or trauma training or recognizing the signs of trauma. There has to be something that allows you to look at yourself as an individual and say, I'm at wit's end right now. I'm getting burned out on this. I need to take a step back. Even if it's nothing but an assessment that you complete, even if you don't turn it in, but something that you can look at so that you can see triggers. They're seeing domestic violence. They're seeing just, we don't call the police because we're happy. We call the police because we're in crisis or something's wrong or we're feeling threatened and there's a heightened, they're operating on a heightened adrenaline coming to that scene. And, when you're coming and you need to be there, but whatever happens there leaves you with some trauma. So I think that when you think about trauma and its effects on the brain and its effects on you as an individual, that there has to be some trauma counseling or trauma assessment or something that you go through so that you know that things are starting to affect you. I can remember when that conversation was brought up, and it's brought up every year when we go to different conferences. And some of the conferences we go to, they have yoga, they have different types of meditation or exercise or walks or different things to help you relieve the stress, to step back from the trauma, because some of the facts that you hear in these cases, some of the discovery you see with the crime scene photos, some of those things that you see, there's bells that are rung that you can't unring. So there's some secondhand trauma. And if you're the person that's actually had to fire the weapon, you know there's a trauma. But in this society, we think that if you show any sign of emotion that you're weak, but that doesn't make you weak, that makes you human. And I think we need to look at our humanity and remember that we're human so that we're operating and functioning in our job the appropriate way.
Yeah, thank you. I think mental health issues should be normalized among police officers. And I think maybe there should even be some kind of a mandate for them to go through trauma counseling if they are involved, with some of these issues that comes up on the job. And like you said, secondary trauma is very, very important, because they see a whole lot of stuff that normal people shouldn't be seeing on a daily basis, not daily basis, but on a constant basis. Now, how about the idea of acculturation? And to me, this is where officers are meant to get to know the community, the patrol. They get to know the leaders. They get to, they become a part of the community. Because if you are a part of the community that you serve, that's a way you deal with people in that community. You don't see them as enemies. You see them as, well, to protect these people. So you do everything within the bounds of decency. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I do know that they cannot be mandated to live in certain communities. That lawsuit's already passed.
No, they don't have to.
Yes. Our court, Domestic Relations and Juvenile Court, under the leadership of Judge Kim Brown, has funded a program called Teen and Police Services Academy. Every year, since I've been on the court, she has funded this program. This program links officers with young people, middle school age, at different schools around the city. These officers give their time to be mentors and link with these young people in a 13-week program. So let's be very clear that not every officer is someone that needs to be investigated. We have a group of good officers that are on the street, that care about their community and are involved in their community. But we fund that program for teens to be involved and spend time with police officers. I also do have Commander Moore at the downtown high school to bring his young people to the court where we can talk to them about being in law enforcement, military, going to law school, whatever in the legal field that they want to do. So we do things through the court, but we fund the Teen and Police Services Academy. So there are officers out here. There's another program that officers do, I think it's called STAR, where they go into the community and they are working within the community. So we have things that are happening, but it's just like when our children do good things, you don't see it in the paper. When officers do good things, you don't see it in the paper either. So there are officers that are really caring about their community and out there. Yes, it would be good if we could have other officer involvement, because we've gone away from the foot patrol. People used to walk a beat. Now they have to be able to be reactionary and get there quicker, so they drive the beat now. But we used to have officers that walked the beat and were familiar. And I think it gives the officer a good idea of who's in the community, gets to know people. But there are officers that are doing things in the community. At Northland High School, I believe there was a couple of officers that actually coached some of the teams up there, and in West High School. So you have officers that are doing things individually, and you have officers that are part of Teen and Police Services Academy, and you have officers that are part of STAR. So you have those officers that are trying to make a positive impact in the community. But it comes down to, I think, moving some of that funding away from buying weaponry and putting some of that funding into our community resources for our children. COVID has really hampered a lot of the things that our children would be able to do with that, reopening the rec centers, getting tutors, getting mentors. All of those things are really important. But I have to say, because I've been to several of the, we call it the TAPS program, been to several of their graduation ceremonies where these young people, their parents come and see them graduate from the Teen and Police Services Academy, get to greet the officers, or they get to know them over the 13 weeks that they're involved with their child. So there are officers that are doing good things. So it's just like when we have our children and they have a great invention, it never makes the paper. There are those out there as well.
Yeah, and I totally understand that because officers every day don't go out and kill. But then when you have one of these anomalies, when a life is taken unjustly, it becomes big news because it's a tale of the dog biting the human or the human biting the dog. When the human bites the dog, it makes news. And
Yes.
on that note, I have to thank you for coming onto Legal Angle, Emmanuel Olawale.
Well, thank you, Emmanuel, for the opportunity. And I'm looking forward to seeing what our Civilian Review Board is going to do. Hopefully, looking for some monthly reports on their decisions, quarterly reports of disciplinary cases, and data on each case that is filed. So there's a lot of anticipation around this particular subject. And I, along with you, am anticipating as well.
Yes, we wish the city good luck. And thank you for watching or listening to Legal Angle. Until next time, stay safe.